Ross Brown, good to see you. Thanks for coming and joining me today, Ross.
Hey, Karl. How's it going?
It's fantastic. Beautiful. We're getting into summer. We were just talking about this before. You live in typically cloudy Ireland, and I am in typically dark and cold Chicago. So, we're in that time of year where we all get to put our shorts on.
I was saying to you, in Ireland, when the sun comes out, everyone is in a mad panic to make the most of it. So that involves, a lot of trips to the beaches and a lot of barbecues. But other than that, it's like there's a lot of like frantic energy in the air, but it's all very positive.
I love it. I love the summer in general. We won't talk about weather though. That's not what the show's about. So you were the third hire in an agency that grew from 3 people to like 40 people. So you got to follow that journey kind of right there. It's kind of cool because I was the first hire at a couple early stage startups that did similar things, but was fundraising. And so it's a little different, but like, it's really fun to see that journey. Talk to me about how much a company changes from 3 to 40 people, because there's a lot of shifts that happen there, right?
It changes immensely. At least that was my experience of it. And I think, particularly in my case, and really probably a huge part of the reason why I've ended up doing what I'm doing now, which I'm sure we'll get to, but it happened so quickly as well. So, for context, I was with that agency 5 years, and, the journey you mentioned happened, in less than 5 years. So going from 3 to 40, that was like a 3.5 year, I suppose, experience. And during those 3.5 years, it was going exceptionally well in terms of revenue and all the nice shiny figures and numbers that everyone looks for, I suppose, in an agency. But underneath, there's a huge amount that's tough and challenging. And yeah, you described it well. There was a lot going really well, but you have these like shifts and stages where the business is almost unrecognizable from where it was 6 months ago. So there's a lot of that. So a lot of change, both I suppose a change that was encouraged or drawn up on or drawn out, and then change that maybe was a bit more unexpected along the way.
Yeah. So the long story short of that is you now run Flex Ops. And at Flex Ops, you guys try to help agency owners kind of get unstuck and break through some of these growth plateaus that I know tend to happen. What do you think were some of the reasons that the agency you were with there for the 5-year period and that grew so quickly, like what contributed to that? Was it all market like timing and just kind of right place, right time? Was it execution, a combination of all the things? Like what mattered?
The answer is a combination of things for sure. I think anybody that's been part of any business that's done well would probably say the same thing. And I think for me though, what comes up when you ask that is first and foremost, the owner, Connor, had identified an opportunity in a market that was relatively untapped. And, that comes through his own personal interests or experiences from, that we're talking about influencer marketing here and specifically YouTube. And Connor was the one, he comes up with the idea and he goes with it. And I think the key thing that made it ultimately work really well is for sure execution, in the sense that you're serving a group of brands to an exceptionally high standard, and you're ultimately helping them see the performance they want or surpassing that. So in our world, that was performance-focused influencer campaigns, and we were doing that exceptionally well. I mean, that is ultimately why we were able to scale it. And it just so happened that at the same time, almost like the fuel to the fire then was that market at that time was starting to really boom. And, then of course, I think probably with a lot of digital agencies, you have a pandemic, which then adds more, I suppose, acceleration to the growth in a lot of ways, particularly if you're working with like e-commerce, which we were at that time. So a combination of things. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of things that contribute to that. Great people. I think a big thing for us was keeping things incredibly simple and effective and we did a really good job of staying in our lane when a lot of our agencies in our space were trying to, well, my view would be they were trying to do too much for too many people. And, we stuck to our guns and did it really well for as long as we basically could. And it served us well, I suppose.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the doing too much for too many people, because my next sort of range of questions was going to be around what holds agencies back from growth. And again, there's always, I'm gonna take a little bit of a side road here and just say market timing is always part of it. I think like it's naive if you say that, oh, we grew so fast because I'm just that great a leader and that's 100% of it, right? Like that's a stupid thing for any founder to say. I would never say that. I can't take credit for, half the growth we've had in companies. But there do seem to be some things that matter when it comes to agencies that tend to grow quickly, especially from that, that early stage to 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 million in revenue. And one of them seems to be that I hear over and over is niching down and finding a very specific thing you do. So talk to me more about that. What holds agency owners back from doing that, from declaring like, this is my little thing that I do, and they instead kind of want to go broad or serve everybody? Like, what's the problem there?
Look, honestly, I think for the people I've worked with, who mainly are people doing less than 1.5 million a year, it's fear of missing out on revenue. I mean, it's fear of passing up on an opportunity that could become massive or it could be a great big client. It's very hard for someone that's generating just enough to pay themselves it's very hard for someone like that to say no to something. And I think that's very understandable. That mindset, though, what I see, it sticks with the owner as they continue to grow the business. So then you find yourself in a scenario where, they can't grow it because they get to say maybe close to 1 million a year and they've got a small team, but they're probably like a full service marketing agency and they don't really know who their ideal client is, and some clients are doing well and some aren't, and there's maybe a whole host of operational things at that point. But to answer your question specifically, I think it does a lot of the time stem from fear, but also it stems from I think just being really truthful. Like, first time agency owners, I don't think they're sitting there thinking consciously about niching and positioning. A lot of the time, they're just thinking about trying to get closed deals and get more revenue. And I think also, I'm not going to bash them for that. I think that's very reasonable. So it's easy for someone like myself and us to have these conversations about what they're not doing right. But put yourself in their shoes, as I will quite often say. What would you do? You would just try and close. But then it gets to that point where you have to look at it more objectively from a different viewpoint to get yourself to the 2, 3 plus, I suppose, if you want to.
I think that's a really good insight. And I appreciate you kind of sticking up for the little guys out there, because it's easy to sit here having kind of learned that lesson. And I'm still learning a lot, but I do feel like I'm pretty strong into the power of niching down. And it's easy for me to look at other people's businesses and say, oh yeah, well, why don't they just pick a really specific subset of the market? But if they don't have a network in that space, they don't have access to figure out how they'd reach more people in that space. That's a really scary thing to do, right? Like if I say, oh, all of a sudden I'm going to do the marketing agency for, I don't know, firemen or whatever, random thing you pick, but you only have one client who's a fireman and you're just hoping you can find more. Yeah, that's tough. That's scary. But the thing I will say is that it's all part of this big, this machine you have to build that's repeatable, right? And so many owners get stuck in, we do a little of everything for everybody. That means I have to be involved in every single account because I'm the mastermind. I'm the smart marketing person who knows all of these different skills. And I'll kind of delegate some little tasks, but I can't delegate the whole thing because it's all so dependent on me. And so you get in this, I can never do enough business development to actually pick a niche and dive into it, because I'm so stuck in the client delivery. It's just vicious cycle. So what do you ever find anything that kind of helps unlock that for people, to see that and be oh, okay, that makes sense? Or is it just something they have to come to eventually?
It's a good question. My immediate thought is it's something that they personally have to come to themselves. And what I would say is, for example, I can give you there are a couple of examples where I've spoken to someone, say, 1.5 years ago, and I would say from what they tell me that they're in that, and I can see it happening. But they have to put their hand up and say, hey, I know, I actually realize probably what's happening now. I want to do something about it properly, and not just use a word earlier there, kind of hope that something changes or hope that you win more clients that are the right ones or whatever. I think they realize that they're kind of hoping something changes or goes in their favor. And, that's not a strategy. That's not a plan. And it's just them being very honest with themselves. And that's what I always say. I put a lot of content out on LinkedIn about, it's so brave for someone that set up their own business to, well, do that, but it's even braver to say, I'm actually really struggling here, or I just need someone to help me a bit. Like, that's not easy for someone to do again. And I again, that's why I'm always like, I think it's actually very hard for me to be like a pushy salesman because I just can't I can't force someone to work with me in the way I work with people because they have to really want it. And to be honest, I'm maybe using that as my own excuse for why I don't maybe push more on the sales front or something. But I think it's very much like the owner has to want it and has to, as you say, see it in themselves that they are stuck in that cycle and something has to give or change, or they have to shift themselves to enable them to break out of it, basically.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's very hard to give advice, whether it's you're a paid advisor or not. It's just very hard to give advice that people then immediately say, all right, I'll go take that. That, like, check the box, that's done. Like, nobody takes advice that way. They hear something 20 times and finally the 20th time it resonates and I realize, oh yeah, I should do that. So I think you're right. You can't just force people to that realization. Another thing you pointed out on LinkedIn recently that I thought was really good is that one of the reasons owners get stuck, and this is very related to the whole picking a niche, but is they won't let go of problem clients. Let's talk a little more about that. What does that look like in your world, or what have you seen people, when they have a client who's clearly not, for whatever reason, good fit? What does that typically look like? And then, why do they not want to get rid of them, remove them?
Again, largely, I think a lot of what I'll probably bring up today comes back to maybe an emotion or a feeling that's attached to an inaction from an owner. And again, I always think this stuff is very understandable. So typical scenario, I start working with an owner that say is stuck at maybe 50, 60K a month, and they're having to work really hard for that themselves personally and probably the few people they have. And they're like, how the heck do we get out of this? And honestly, one of the first things usually I like to do is look at where the revenue is coming from. Very typical scenario will be, there will be a cluster, let's say somewhere between 10 and 20%, maybe even 25% of clients that I look at, and based on what they're telling me, I kind of feel like the immediate obvious action is to cut them. And cut sounds a bit ruthless, a bit blunt, but it's just not working for either party. And the very typical situation there is that maybe for the agency it's hurting profitability because they're maybe over delivering. Maybe for the owner, they're personally attached to the owner of that business or their point of contact because they've worked with them since like day one. A very common phrase I'll hear is like, we've worked with them since we opened the agency. And like, I see people taking pride in that. So again, I'm not surprised it's hard for them then to say, they're not for us anymore, but that's very common. And then equally, just as with any business, like that agency, if I work with someone that's been running their agency for 6 years, like that's quite a long time, especially given in the context of my experience with an agency. 6 years is longer than, basically I was even there. So that's a very long time in my eyes. And the agency and what the owner specializes in and what they do has probably evolved. So they've probably just outgrown each other. But it's the inaction that comes from the fear of losing the revenue, or fear of upsetting someone that they've worked with for a long time, or fear of not being able to replace the revenue is maybe even a bit more of an accurate way to describe it. Yeah, I'd say that probably covers it. But the important point there is it's the feeling that the owner is experiencing that puts them in that almost freeze mode. I don't want to do this, or I'll just push it to one side because it's easier just not to do anything.
Totally. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It is an emotional response or attachment to a certain clients. And I'll give you my personal share on this. We bought a business a couple of years ago, and I had started one a few years before that. And so I've kind of gone through as both founder and an acquirer. And as an acquirer, it's amazing how much more clear-headed I was about those decisions to let go of certain clients, because I'm going to say this very bluntly, like every client felt like a number, not an actual person who I've met, because I hadn't met them. Literally, they were all new to me. And in a way, again, there's like strengths and weaknesses there. In some ways, it was great because I could let go of those not profitable clients because I didn't have a 5-year relationship with them. The previous owner did. And that was, it's like I was objective about they're not a good fit for us anymore. On the other hand, I had to go back and rebuild relationships with all those clients, and start to like get the team rebuilding relationships with them. So there's a lot of work there. It's not like it's all good. It's just that it is amazing how much that not having that attachment helped in the kind of transition, and just let us, keep the good clients who we did see as objectively very good fits, and the ones that weren't, we let them move on. And yeah, but it is hard to do, especially when, again, you're right. Like you were the one who originated that deal. The relationship is sort of personal, the owners, and yep, I get it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, not having met the client in person, for example. So maybe there's not like a real relationship there. In our case, again, a lot of the clients that we maybe won during COVID or just before it. And again, I think this is quite a typical thing for people that I work with, because they might have set up their agency then. Yeah, you never met these people. But the ones that we met before, we felt like we had this, blood blood tight bond with, because we'd met them in New York or something. And again, don't get me wrong, some of them were long-term clients anyhow, so it's a separate point. But I think back to that, and there's definitely that like layer of emotional attachment that I don't think I was ever going to let go of at one point, which is a feeling of mine in hindsight. But yeah, it's funny. I think just during that period, and then you have a lot of quite transactional relationships, which are really just about the numbers, and very different. But yeah.
Another thing you said that struck me, and I don't remember your exact wording, but I kind of wrote down a note that like a lot of people are held back because they won't consistently do business development. Like, in other words, when they're not busy, they're out there prospecting, looking for people. But when they get busy, they immediately just focus on the work and they kind of ignore that. Where does that come from? What emotions does that stem from in your mind? And then, how do owners break free from that? Because that feels like one of the biggest traps too.
This may be one of the most consistent things that comes up for me that I'll really struggle actually to get agency owners to kind of align with, or see the upside to, or see the rationale behind it. Very, very common. And it comes back to that cycle we talked about earlier, where an owner is fighting really hard to win revenue. They win it, they have to serve it, and then all of a sudden they're back to where they were, fighting really hard to win revenue. And during that time of delivery, they weren't doing any BD. And for me, look, there's two key things here. The bit of context I always layer into this is, if someone says to me, look, I really want to grow this agency, and this is the size I want it to be, and I'd love it to be this size by this date for this reason, and if the why and all that is really there, that's great. A huge part of their growth is going to be contingent on like a sales strategy or an approach to BD that's going to enable them to do that. If then 3 months later that owner says, we're going to take ease off on BD because of whatever reason, it's completely contradicting what they've said they want from this business. And that's the one where I'm like, wait a minute, like, talk to me about this. It's not the one where an owner, which again is completely different. I think there probably is, I still wouldn't recommend it, but if someone's ambition is not to, like, let's say somebody just wants a nice, relatively efficient, lean business that maybe does, 100K a month, which again is absolutely brilliant. They don't probably have to spend as much time on the BD hunt. I think it's probably still healthy for them to market their business and market themselves, which is different in my mind. But they don't maybe have to be quite as aggressive or consistent on the sales and BD side of things. But if you are wanting to grow a business, particularly an agency, and you want it to be a notable size, you have to be consistently doing the BD activity. And for me personally, it stems from, again, you don't really know what's ahead of you. And for me, I worked with a coach when I was MD of the agency, which, one thing he said, which really stuck with me, was, just asking yourself the question, what did I do today to grow the business? Every day, what did I do today to grow the business? And that really stuck with me, because so many days, I might get to it, I didn't really get a chance today because I was doing something. There's always going to be an excuse. But if your ambition is to grow an agency, you have to be doing things towards that. And of course, then I think that's just my view on it. And you can probably sense there's a bit of a personal attachment to that, given, what I just said about my coach or whatever. But looking at it in another way, I think one of the reasons people do ease off is that they don't want to put pressure on their team, or they feel like they're putting too much pressure on their team. But again, what I see a lot of there is part of the key word is they feel like, or they think they're putting too much pressure on their team. A lot of the same agencies maybe don't actually know because they're not tracking time, or they're not measuring outputs and inputs in some fashion. And there's a lot of guessing or basing on how people are saying they're getting on, as opposed to actually looking at maybe some data or financials, or doing some resourcing and planning properly, and managing their pipeline, for example. So there's kind of a lot there, but I think just in general, if you want to grow an agency, being consistent with your BD activity, whatever it is probably going to help.
Yeah. I would go further than what you're saying. I would I would take the stake and plant it a little further in the ground and say, like, if you want your agency to survive, like, this just needs to become a default thing that happens every week. And because it's not just that, I agree, if you're going to grow, it needs to be like a daily, we are always building new business. We're always doing sales calls, always pushing to do more of them, like whatever. Yes. But even if you want to stay the same size, it is so much easier to have 10 really good, really easy clients if you've got 100 coming in every month that want to work with you. I mean, again, like you can have 10, you have a great high margin business. It's very low effort work to run and do the, actual production work for. But in order to do that, you need a pipeline of more clients than you can handle all the time. And so to my perspective is like, just do that work. If it's 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever, no matter what, no matter how full you are, and just start dropping some of your old clients when it starts to get like, you get better deals coming in, and start dropping the old ones, putting in new ones that are better margin, better prices. Like, figure out a way to keep that value going up, even if you're not growing in a like top line or in a, bottom line fashion. It's still really important.
I think it's brilliant. The thing I'd say there is that is such a foreign concept to anyone that's got an agency with doing less than $1 million. Like, such the and that again, it comes back to their perspective of what they're doing, in that the idea of them having so many opportunities coming in that they have to say no to the majority of them seems like something that's a fantasy, Carl. Like, that's right. You've literally made that up, Carl. Like, that's not a thing.
Right.
Right.
So it is going back to like what separates the ones that grow fast or that just like are healthy for the long term versus the ones that are kind of like always struggling there, just survival mode. It really is the ability to consistently build deal flow. And, I go back to that over and over because I think it's just fundamentally, you're right. Tons of people miss it, but it's so important. You did say something though related to this that I wanted to highlight because, again, this is a good related topic. You said something along the lines of, we didn't build and fill our pipeline overnight. It took consistent effort over 3 to 5 year period. Totally another really good point, because my experience is the same. We were just saying before the call, we bought a company a couple of years ago, and it's taken us 2 years of marketing and business development and sales work to now finally be closing significantly more deals than we were when we bought it. It's been flat otherwise. And so it's a lot of work, man.
Yeah, one of the things that I just absolutely love about the agency I was with was there was a brand in particular that the owner, he just really liked the brand. But, beyond that, it was a product or a tool he'd used himself personally. And he, beyond all that, felt that they'd be a really good fit for the type of advertising that we were running with influencers in relation to performance, etc. And I don't actually know the exact time frame he tried to win them as a client, but he'd started before I joined, and just towards the end of the year prior to I left, so we're talking like over a 5 to 6 year span, he tried to win this client, and they won it. And it was just relentless. Like, that to me is the epitome of what you're getting at, and the point I was making was, this isn't just like a random, like, I think it highlights a few things. Like, he had the awareness of the market and the brand and the product and the space he was operating in to understand how actually powerful this could be for that brand. So it wasn't just, oh, I really like this company, I'm going to go try and work with them. There was logic behind it. And trying different people, crafting different angles, trying different mediums to reach out to people at the brand, because they were a really big company. So there were plenty of people to try and get an angle into and have a call with. But Yeah, he got it in the end, but it was just pure persistence. And I think it's, I definitely get a few eyebrow raises whenever I say to, owners, like, you're going to try and win these clients for the next 3, 4, 5 years. I think the majority of them, not that they don't understand, not that there's a lack of understanding, it's just that they, again, haven't really thought about it like that before. But again, the really key thing there is knowing who the right fit for you is and why. And that's probably as much about that's the motivation behind making it happen, as more than anything. It's not just, I like Yeti water bottles or, coolers, so I want to work with Yeti. There has to be some commercial reasoning behind it too.
Yeah, totally. And again, this kind of it all is related to the business development conversation. But like, if you have 10 calls a week with prospects, even if they're very early in the stage or they're years from closing, they're just people you want to keep in touch with, that is a huge value driver in the long run. But you have to be able to think more than 1 month ahead. You got to be thinking like, I'm going to close these guys in 6 months when their next budget cycle comes, or, in 2 years when so-and-so leaves and they have a new marketing contact, then I'm going to be able to close them. But I'm going to stay in touch till then. Like there's always a way, right? But you do have to be very willing to do a lot of this relationship building and maintenance work without it paying off right away. Because as you point out, these, 3 to 6 year deals, not that uncommon, unfortunately.
Definitely.
Yeah. There's something else I think you wrote in one of your posts made me think about this, but it's the question around, can an agency ever be a passive business? We're both are trying to work with agencies. And, in my case, I want my agencies to run well without my direct input. So I want them to be somewhat passive. One of my early KPIs I had for myself as an owner is how long can I take off, be just completely MIA, like off email, off phone calls, and the company still runs, doesn't fall apart. And I've had periods where I could get away for a whole month. I've had periods where it was just like a week was tight. So it's varied. But in your experience, like, is it ever possible to get an agency to a point where it is truly passive? And how big does it have to be before that's really possible?
It's definitely possible. I think the biggest bit about this that's a complete misconception is that I am saying that's success for everyone. And I'm saying this in the sense that it all comes back to, what does the owner actually want? Like you've said, what you literally just said is that is your ambition for the agencies. Like, you want them to operate in a more passive manner for your own personal benefit or personal needs, whatever it is. Like, that's your ambition. I am not saying whatsoever that the opposite, having a very active hands-on owner, is wrong. If anything, if that's what they really want, fantastic. It probably has a great chance of doing really well too. So both of these scenarios can be very, very successful outcomes for the owner. If it just comes back to what they want. And I think I've gone off on a little bit of tangent for this question, but I think it's really important to touch on. I wouldn't say the majority, but I think somewhere in the region of 30 to 40% of people I work with don't actually know what they really want. Maybe it is close to 50. They don't really know what they want with the agency. And it's not a problem, but it's just going to be very difficult to help them until they have a real tight grip on that. And I don't know. I feel like for me to help owners properly, I need to know that, or need to get a sense for it. I'm not saying you need it to maybe go off and run a really successful business. I don't know.
Yeah, but to your point, how do you measure success when you don't know what you're optimizing for?
That's the way I see it,
Yeah.
But I think the passive one is, for sure. I mean, look, again, passive to one owner is probably coming online for a few hours a week to do certain things with his leadership team. And that's phenomenal. Passive to another owner is maybe being around the office and doing certain things, but not being required to be there. I'm not sure, but it probably varies from person to person. I think the most common one I hear is certainly people who have a desire to just have more free time to do other things. And other things generally means non-agency stuff like products or even hobbies or family stuff, whatever it might be. So yeah, I think it's very achievable. I don't really know if there is like a size it has to be necessarily. I don't think so. I certainly know of one agency that I would suggest is pretty passive in terms of the owner's input. That is doing about 1.5 million, and that's perfect for them, and fair play to them. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a good perspective, and I think you are right to hammer in the point of you have to know what you're really trying to do here, and not just for the business, but you personally. And this is something that I've only started to recently look at, but I have some friends who own businesses that are older than me, and they look at it in a way of like, I want to have, let's just make up a round number, $10 million in liquid assets by the time I retire so that I can gift some to my family and live the lifestyle I want for the next, 30 years or whatever, right? They've picked a sort of number, and then they work backwards from that and say, I need my business to be worth at least $10 million. And so here's what I need to do to get to that valuation. I think that's like brilliant, right? That's like a very concrete roadmap of like how you would get there, right? Not everybody's going to be able to do it. That's a whole nother problem, but like at least they have a guiding light and a reason that they want to get to that point. And otherwise, you're right. Like it's easy to just like, oh, I don't know. Do we grow this year? Are we just going to kind of hang out and do the same? Am I optimizing for my free time? Am I optimizing for growth? Am I optimizing for having the most employees possible? Like you got to know.
I think where that comes in then to the actual, day-to-day functioning of the agency is that it's the difference between things maybe happening versus things almost always happening consistently. That's what I'll then see when I look or lift up the hood and look at an agency. You can almost spot that as the biggest difference between, one that is functioning like a business versus one that's functioning like, glorified freelancer, basically, with a couple of people helping them. That's a big difference in my opinion. But again, it does generally, I think, stem from the direction piece, which for any business is really important.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about your direction then. We'll shift it up a bit. So you started FlexOps a couple years ago, right? So you're 2 years in. And give me a lay of the land. Like, is it just you mostly? Do you have some freelancers helping you? I know it's still like relatively early, but like, give me what it looks like today and what you guys do.
It's just me, and it's great. Look, I'll be very clear on that I wanted to find a way. Like my want and my reasoning behind what I'm doing now is I wanted to find a way to support more Connors. So Connor was again the name of the owner of the agency, and I was very fortunate to work alongside someone like that and support him achieve his goals and grow his business. And I was very lucky to have a part in that. And it was hugely rewarding for me personally, but at a professional level, it gave me exposure to an agency in a way that many people don't get the opportunity to see. So my motivation through simply having conversations with other agencies during that time, I just came out of it. I was like, look, I know there are more people like him that need support or could benefit from help to get their agency to a point where it's closer to what they really want themselves or what they might be looking for. And, direction-wise, when I started out, I didn't have much more than that. And I think with any business, there definitely was a bit of figuring things out as I started. But I think that's probably one of the things I did really well. I didn't wait to have like a perfectly crafted, wonderful plan. And I'm sure if you speak to many people who've done well, and probably even yourself, I'm sure like that's just not a thing waiting to get this perfect idea. So I went out there, and I think when I first started, I was like, I could help any owner run their business, which was a terrible idea because, I think one of the first conversations I had was with an e-commerce brand, and things come up in that conversation, which I was quite gladly admit I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. Right. Whereas with agencies, I felt like I would say I know it pretty well, given the nature of the role I had. So yeah, I mean, direction-wise for me and how it's been going, and like as with any coaching and one-person business and consulting business, really, there's a ceiling, right? Like there's a ceiling because it's time, and I don't have a problem with that. Like I'll stress this, like I don't currently sit here with a overwhelming desire to do anything about that right now. And again, for me personally, that's perfect. Like I'm very comfortable with that and happy with that. Some people would hear that and think that's maybe a terrible business model. He's capped his revenue because he's not going to set up a course or develop a product. And I have lots of ideas about things I could do, Carl, but to be honest with you, I don't really have the ambition right now to do it. And I don't think there are things that I could do or want to do that I'm just going to put the time into right now for a couple of reasons. But fundamentally, the core business itself is doing really well. And that's, I'm so happy about that. And really well means two things. To me, one is the clients, the agency owners I'm working with are thriving. Like the vast majority of them are doing really, really well, which is so exciting. Even the ones I finished up with, over the last couple of years, it's finished up because they just need to go off and get their heads down and be consistent with the stuff we've probably talked about. So that's fantastic. I'm really, really happy to see that. And then the second thing is, just the reality for me is I can be so flexible with my weeks, which suits me and my family. And, even from a financial standpoint, I can pay myself what I want and need. And like, that's such a privileged thing to be able to say, to be really honest. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But again, I just reiterate, like, if you think about, if you put a dot here, starting a business, and a dot here today, I want to help more people. Like the owner I worked with, I'm currently helping on a monthly basis a dozen agency owners like him. And that for me is, that's great. So really happy about that. But as we kind of touched on before we hit record, like any business, lots of ups and downs along the way. So it's maybe not all rosy as you're going through it, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's a good, and I appreciate your honest take on this, because I say the same thing to people when they're asking about, like, what my vision is. And it's like, yeah, I actually do have a pretty big vision now, but I didn't in year 1 or 2. It was, let's survive. A, let's figure out this thing's viable. And then B, like, I don't know, just like it's a good lifestyle. Like I get to have the time off I want, time with family, time with friends, being able to travel, and it makes enough money, right? There was no big vision. There was no like, this has got to be $1 billion thing. None of that. That was not my ambition. And so I think you bring up the point that, you could start with one set of goals and sort of like one level of ambition, and it might change over the course of 1, 5, 10, or 20 years, because, we've got a long career ahead of us. So things are likely to change in your life one way or the other. And the other thing that's cool about it is once you own and operate a business and you start to work with other real customers, and, you start to do this a few times, you will see so many more opportunities, right? Like I'm sure, you, again, you say you don't want to launch a course or product or whatever, maybe you don't, but you're going to find so many possible angles if you ever do want to.
I think that's just it in a nutshell. Because it's funny, Ross maybe 4 or 5 years ago would not have given himself credit for this. But what I will give myself credit for is that I've given myself the opportunity to keep an eye out for opportunities and weigh them up, and then as I wish, act on them, which is a position that I'm very, very happy to be in. Whereas, previously, I think probably I wasn't maybe even keeping an eye out for opportunities maybe like 6, 7 years ago. Like I just was like, oh, well, I do this job and do it well, and that's fine. But yeah, definitely I completely agree with that. And I think just to add a little bit more context where I'm at personally with this, like, I think we maybe even said about this when we spoke in the past, but I personally would be, my ambition or my belief is that I will find myself operating an agency at some point, but I have no idea when or what the context is behind that. I just suspect it's almost one of those ones where I'm like, it's not waiting necessarily for the opportunity, but I'm trying to identify what makes the most sense for me and when. And that's a longer term, I suppose. Is it a vision? Not so much. I suspect it's a desire for myself at some point, right. Really.
Yeah. Again, like these things like that, like a couple of years ago, I was like, I want to learn what it's like to buy a business. And it's like, I just put myself in an environment around people who were buying businesses. I learned what they were learning. And then I started doing the actions that it takes to set up buying a business. And then I bought a business. Like it all sounds like, when you look at it from a 30,000 foot view, you're like, oh, that was so well orchestrated. Like, what, like, I don't know about that. It was much more of like, I just kind of got exposure to the same thing over and over, and I realized it was possible. And then I started kind of doing it, seeing what would happen. Then I did it. And it's like, again, all this stuff, it's, I think people, when they talk about you talk to really successful people who are, light years ahead of us, let's say, and what they've accomplished, they often what they call retcon, or kind of like rewrite history on themselves to say like it was this big, this whole, that was the plan all along, right? And I think that's rarely the case. Again, then maybe occasionally it is, but I think a lot of times we're all just moving through this, and then opportunities step in front of the other, and you just kind of like take one sometimes, and it makes sense.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I like that retcon thing. I think you're probably spot on. It maybe happens when someone's maybe writing a book or something. I don't know, but potentially.
I know we're going to talk about books in a second, and I have a strong belief that almost all autobiographies and a lot of biographies are just sort of retconned with the end in mind. And again, I'm not saying they're not valuable, I'm not saying they're not interesting, but often you just can tell like they wrote this at a point in time where they're trying to tell a certain story. It is what it is. It's my cynic in me. All right. Let's talk about something more fun. What do you wish agency owners, they're trying to get over that $1 million in revenue hump? What do you wish they all knew? What do you wish is the thing you could unlock for them?
That they're probably the blocker to doing that. That's it. I think almost, in some cases, it's not specifically them, or it's maybe not the key thing, but almost always. And yeah, it ties into, I actually thought after we spoke about the niching, the next thing was going to be about what would you say is like, is there anything else that maybe is a key thing that you see in owners who are stuck? And then my answer would have been the owner themselves, just getting in the way of everything. And I think it's that, honestly. No, it kind of, I'm not blaming them. I don't think it's their fault necessarily, but I suppose the responsibility has to fall somewhere, and it probably comes back to that point of they haven't realized for themselves yet, like they're in this cycle or in this rut because of what they're not doing or what they're spending too much time doing. And so yeah, generally that, the owner themselves.
Again, I totally agree, and I would go a step further and to say that just that in general, the most successful people, by whatever metric of success you want to say, whether it's their, happiness level or their ability to accomplish certain goals or money or whatever, almost without an exception that I can think of, have a very high level of self-determination and a high level of like sort of autonomy or belief that they can affect the change that needs to happen to make them move forward in whatever direction. So in other words, they never get into that self-talk of, oh, if only I could catch a break, or something like that. That's not what successful people do. Like, it's just bar none. Like, I don't hear that from successful people. You hear that from people who are stuck, and, and I again, like you're saying, like, it's not necessarily a blame thing. It's just that at the end of the day, if you take that level of personal responsibility seriously, like, you're much more likely to actually take the actions to try to break through things. Whereas if you're always putting it on it's somebody else or the environment's fault, then you're just not going to move forward. But anyway, I digress, because I do think it's a good point. It's just making people understand they're the blocker is a huge unlock. I'm definitely with you. Let's talk about reading. You like any books? Any books you've read in the last couple of years that maybe affected your journey as an entrepreneur, or has really stuck out to you for something you either recommend to clients or just you personally like? It could be a fun book.
I feel like I have the same answer to this, and I've had the same answer for like 10 years at this point, for most of it. But okay, so I'm not really that big a reader. Best book of all time, as far as I'm concerned, is the Lord of the Rings. If you disagree,
that's a good series.
Yeah,
I don't disagree.
It's great. Yeah, I've read it many, many times. Maybe more business related. I think one business related one that is a bit more recent. It's probably one of the few materials or books I recommend to any client, which is the book is from David C. Baker. So it's The Business of Expertise. Yeah, I recommend it largely through the lens of actually positioning, which, funny enough, came up in this conversation. I won't claim to have read countless materials on positioning, but of all the stuff I have read, it is certainly, I think it does a good job of breaking down what can be quite a complex topic into quite a digestible, it's not that long a book really. So that one, and then the one that I don't know. I think it had an impact on me, I suppose. There's a book called Why Don't We Learn from History? And the author, I always forget his, I think it's B.H. Little Hart. And I think given the state of the world at the moment, it would be a pretty good read for people in the sense that it ultimately talks about, things like understanding. We understand maybe more what not to do, or we should, or have the opportunity to learn what not to do in the world based on what's already happened. And we can really learn a lot from history in the context of people have made a lot of mistakes over the years, and we do well to maybe keep an eye on that. Not so much what we should do because of our things, but what we shouldn't. For me, I think there's a lot going on in the world beyond business, and I think that's one of those books that really kind of just helps you think maybe a bit more constructively about all of it. So yeah, those are the three very different books, I will say.
I love it. That's awesome. I'm a big, I'll say, just to add my own personal here. First of all, that sounds awesome because I'm a big fan of I'm getting to be a big fan of history. I wasn't for many years. In the last 5 years, I've just started to I read a couple of history books a year at least. There is something to that whole, like, what's happening now has happened before, and it would be smart to know where this is going. And in a way, you just look at the past and it's like, yeah, we're probably on the same track in a lot of ways. And then hopefully avoid some of those issues. But I also think it is if you're going to read, like, having a variety of types of, reading material that you can draw from, it unlocks new things, right? So I think that's cool. Awesome. Well, Ross Brown, this has been fantastic. I love geeking out on what agency owners could do better. And you're working with people in the same size range that I talk to every day about acquisition stuff. So this is like really fun. Compare notes. Where can people find out more about Flex Ops? I keep butchering my words. Apologies. Flexops.co, right? And then how about you personally, if anybody wants to follow up?
Yeah, it's just LinkedIn for me. I'm a one social media channel guy. So I think my URL or slug is
we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
RNA Brown. That's just me. I post a good bit as you've kind of alluded to. I try to keep it focused on stuff that should be useful for agency owners, and then there's a few random bits of me, like, reflecting on life and things in there.
I love it, man. I'm a big LinkedIner, and I'm definitely going to be following along. I know I used a bunch of your material to prompt us here today. Awesome. Well, Ross Brown, thank you so much for the time. This has been fun, and I hope we get to talk again real soon.
Nice. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.